There are a few games out there that really went under the radar that could have been absolutely huge. They were either just really poorly advertised, just really weren't games that people thought they typically enjoy, or they flopped on release but slap now. And there is something about finding these hidden gems that is such a satisfying diamond hunt in what is an incredibly saturated market dominated primarily by a few key players and franchises within gaming. And part of what I want to do on this channel is shed light on these kind of games or give a new and fresh perspective on some decently well-known games that just got a bad rap on launch and were cast aside by the masses. Now today, I'd love to be able to bring one of these games into the spotlight for you. Normally on this channel, I've given a primarily positive set of reviews on the games that I've been working my way through, other than Starfield, which was unfortunately a massive letdown. And after getting my Steam Deck, I've been on a mission to get through my Steam backlog because the sheer amount of wasted wonga on games that I've never even booted up is actually starting to hurt my feelings. But today, I'm going to be talking to you about a game called Biomutant, and oh boy, do I have some things to say. My name is BigWynter, and let's do this. So as usual, I'll be splitting things up into three distinct categories: visuals and performance, gameplay and mechanics, and finally the story and world building. But before I do so, let me paint you a brief overview of what the game itself is before we dive into the finer details of what makes Biomutant tick. Biomutant is an open-world post-apocalyptic RPG released by THQ Nordic back in 2021, originally for the PC, Xbox One, and PS4. It had a release in 2022 for the PS5 and Xbox Series XS, and most recently came out on Switch a couple of weeks ago on the 14th of May 2024. In this post-apocalyptic world, you play as your very own mutated rodent-like creature using a mixture of Kung Fu style melee combat, ranged weapons, and a series of mutant abilities in order to save this post-apocalyptic world that you live in from civil war and the world eater threats. Initially when the game was advertised, I was actually really hyped as the description of the game seemed like it would be exactly the type of gameplay I typically enjoy. But before I could get my hands on it, larger companies like IGN and Games Radar gave the game primarily decent reviews, whilst the gaming community at large didn't seem to be quite so forgiving. Now, one of the big reasons I like making these reviews is I'm just another gamer like you who's watching the video right now, and being able to provide these more raw reviews without the fluff and politics of larger companies I think is actually a really valuable resource. So I waited for a sale so I could give this game a go myself at some point so I could form my own opinion. So without further ado, let's just jump into the first category of graphics and visuals. Disclaimer here, I actually did 99.9% of my playthrough on this Steam Deck, which I picked up recently so I could clock in some hours on those games that have been gathering dust in my Steam library. So playing on the Steam Deck, it obviously didn't look outstanding per se, so a lot of the footage that you're seeing was taken using a few quick loads back on my PC. And I have to say, having cloud saves on a game where I can hop from Steam Deck to PC has been so nice, such a game changer. Now, throughout my playthrough, I'd say the game ran fairly decently, but nothing spectacular to be honest. The game would routinely drop frames on the deck in the more intense situations, although I didn't really find this on the PC version. My thoughts are this is more of a Steam Deck optimization issue than a pure performance problem, so I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. From my research, the game did apparently have the same kind of dropped frames on the previous gen console releases, but ran absolutely fine on PS5 and Xbox Series XS. However, as I kind of suspected, I did a little research on the performance and visuals on the Switch, and God as a Geek had this to say, which gave me a good chuckle. But back to my actual experience with the game, whilst I did really love the use of vibrant colors in both the purely natural and the previously populated areas, which had been reclaimed by nature post-apocalypse, I'd still say even on max settings, it's a little rough around the edges, and the texture qualities are more dated than I would like. Visually, I'd definitely say it was aesthetic and enough to get yourself immersed in the traversal of the map, even stopping to take in your surroundings at points, but it would be pretty far from winning any awards in my opinion. So for the graphics and visuals, I'm kind of torn because it looked very different on the Steam Deck and on PC, but I'd give it a solid 6.5 as it looked great at points, but nothing to really write home about. Next, let's take a look at the mechanics and the combat, which is where I feel the advertising team spent the majority of their focus when promoting the game. Before looking directly at the combat itself, I wanted to touch on the class and the breed system. When starting the game, you'll have full customization of your character, allowing you to lean into whichever playstyle that you like the most. Currently, there are now 7 classes in the game with the release of the Switch variant, all with their own strengths and weaknesses. Then to further customize, you can also choose your breed, which all have their own variants of the base stats to further min-max your playstyle. Whilst customization is usually a good thing, I actually found the sheer amount of customization to be a little overwhelming. After finishing the game, I now have a greater understanding of which race and class best suits my playstyle, but at the time time, I just went for the mercenary class and the Hyla race, as it gave the best jack of all trades character. Don't stress about choosing too hard though, as each time you level, you can boost whatever stance you fancy. But moving on to the combat, as previously mentioned, at your disposal you have a variety of different melee weapons from single-handed, dual-wielding and two-handed, as well as a ton of different ranged weapon styles and a series of mutant abilities and powers. Now the melee combat itself takes a huge inspiration from traditional martial arts, namely Kung Fu, or as called in-game Wung Fu, using a variety of acrobatic twists, turns, flips and parries to overwhelm your opponents. Additionally, there are also a number of melee plus range combinations combining both strengths of your melee attacks with those coming from your ranged firearms. And if that weren't enough and you still find yourself getting swarmed or surrounded, you can utilize a variety of your mutant abilities to level the playing field. Usually, with all of these styles of attack at my fingertips, I'd be pretty excited for every encounter, but I'd be lying if I said that were the case here. Now true, it was pretty exhilarating to begin with, but it got a little boring and honestly straight frustrating at points, with your attacks not really having any satisfying feedback. The backflips and rotations look awesome, but realistically just cause you to flip beyond the person you're actually trying to hit, meaning you end up missing your target half the time unless you're really careful. Before you say skill issue, you're probably right, honestly, but if you do pick up the game, let me know if you agree in the comments. Additionally, I did really like the psionic and the mutant abilities, but the gunplay just felt a little too lackluster and so cheesy at points. Every gun you have has unlimited ammo, so there is absolutely no reason to ever get close enough to put yourself in harm's way unless you felt like the challenge. So unless you're setting yourself that challenge, even on the harder difficulties like the ones I played on, the encounters were just straight easy, honestly. Interlinked with the weapon system is the game's very own crafting system. Whilst you can find various weapons on your journey ready to use, which you can also upgrade at workbenches or in your inventory using the resources you gather around the map, you can also craft your own weapons, customizing them a little more to your liking. By picking various components of varying quality and specs, you can make some pretty unique weapons with damage traits that you like the most. I actually really liked the crafting side of the game, as it allowed you to craft much better weapons than you'd find just lying around. However, the actual process of finding the resources and the upgrade system itself was so tedious. Around the map, there are a ton of these resource totems you need to knock down to gather the resources, often needing to break down a ton to get enough to actually do anything with. Additionally, the looting system of finding new parts was just such a ball ache. In every new facility or building you'd find, there would be a ton of these small little loot containers with small amounts of the resources in the total area, meaning you had to spend a decent amount of time at every little location to find every little container to get everything out of them. And to make matters worse, there would be this gacha style animation that played every time you open anything, even if you're getting the most trash item or material, which you kinda usually would. The sheer quantity of small little items and resources you'd fill your inventory with just seemed a little excessive. Now it is true you can break down all these parts into scrap to build something better. Why not just have less little turdy items and more decent ones you can actually do something with? Just my 2 cents. Before we move on to the actual exploration and traversal, I briefly wanted to touch on the puzzle system in the game, which you encounter at pretty much every location on the map. Aesthetically, all of these puzzles look very different from the outside. From wiring puzzles in an electrical box to the dials on an old phone box or to rotations of a globe. But in reality, every puzzle is essentially the same thing, where you need to rotate the orange and white lines to match up, and in every case, they're pretty easy. Now, if you follow the channel for a while, or if you've ever been to a live stream of mine, you'll know that that's saying a lot that I think it's easy. I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and every other Wednesday if you ever want to come hang out. Shameless plug over, I'm all for puzzles in these sorts of games, and I usually get great satisfaction out of them, but here I can't really say that I did. Some of them are purely side quest related and optional, but some of them are essential to open doors and do certain elements on the main quest. Finally, in this section, I want to touch on the exploration of the map. Honestly, I was pleasantly surprised by the sheer scale of the map. Being a small little rodent creature, I had fairly low expectations, picturing something more of the lines of the back garden in Grounded. But the map actually has a really good scale to it, with a variety of different regions and biomes jam-packed full of explorable structures, caves, and outcroppings. To begin with, you'll have to traverse the starter region on foot, but I found being a rodent who can run on all fours, it never really felt like you were going all that slow, and it didn't really really bother me. I find it's really typical in RPG games to have your on-foot traversal to be painfully slow relative to getting your first mount, but that wasn't really the case here, which I'm happy to see. But you will also be happy to hear that the game does boast its own mount system for even faster travel. To begin with, these range from a number of four-legged companions, but the more regions you explore, you'll be able to traverse the rivers and the skies much more easily, and you'll find various vehicles kitted to defend yourself with. I'm being intentionally cryptic as I don't want to spoil all that much, but I did actually really enjoy the mount system in the game, and I think you would too. On top of the mounts and items, you also have a number of psionic abilities that allow for some seriously fun traversal, and this was by far my favorite. But if you're not a fan of taking in the scenery, or you are in a hurry, you can fast travel from any above ground location to fast travel sites you can find at all the major points of interest, as well as a scattered few minor sites of interest. All in all, I found this section really hard to rate as some elements are really good, but just don't quite hit right. It feels a little like you've given a really average chef some of the best ingredients in the world, and you know the meal could have been a bit better. So with that in mind, I'd give this section a solid 7 out of 10. Finally, let's move on to the story and the world building before we wrap things up. So fair warning, there will be spoilers ahead, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this, it was quite Backtracking a little, like I said, I really enjoy the kind of apocalypse vibe where the humans are gone and nature is blooming and reclaiming the cityscapes. Whereas on the opposite side of things, that's part of the reason why I never was sold on the Fallout franchise, as it looks like ass, but that's for another time. Let me know which Fallout game you like to see on the channel in the comments. But despite Biomutant supposedly ticking so many boxes for me, what went wrong? To me, it just comes down to the story, the narrative, and the overall flow of the game. As I mentioned earlier, the game revolves around you as the main character embarking on a journey to unite the various warring tribes and to take down the 4 World Eaters, destroying the Tree of Life. Sounds pretty awesome, right? Pretty crazy high stakes and what sounds like an epic narrative. But I just really struggled to get into it. First of all, the whole tutorial to the game is way too long. During it, you're introduced to many key characters and elements of your backstory, like your Muma, which I'll get to in a minute, by essentially transporting you back in time through your memories, and it's just done so poorly and so jarringly. Just as you feel you're getting to grips with the aspects of the game and finding some cool stuff, you're ripped back to your memories as a small little rat, which felt so immersion breaking every time. Once you do escape the tutorial, you're met with your first big decision: which tribe you want to ally yourself with as you embark to try and unite the warring tribes once and for all. Usually in games such as these, raids on enemy strongholds to take control of territories is usually so much fun and something I really look forward to. Biomutant, I did thoroughly enjoy it to begin with, but as time went on, it got really old really fast. At each stronghold, you had the choice to face their forces head on, or in some instances, you'd be able to do an optional side objective to force them into surrender. These sneaky options are actually really cool, but the higher your charisma is, it gets to the point you could basically just ask for the stronghold and they'll give it to you. And to be honest, my charisma was not that high, and I could still do this routinely. But by the end of the game, I wasn't complaining, as the same unskippable animation would play every single stronghold, and I was just happy to get them out of the way. Moving on to the World Eaters, these were essentially the 4 big bad boss enemies, which all required their own unique problem solving, item construction, and combat prowess. Again, sounds really cool and badass, right? But I found the preparation for each boss to be very tedious and essentially identical. To fight each boss, you needed a particular mount or item to qualify to take it on. To get this item, you had to find a key figure, and to actually build the item, you needed to find X amount of Y thing, which you had to rinse and repeat for each of the 4 World Eaters. At the start of the game, I was just enjoying the exploration and the mechanics, so I didn't really think much of it, as it's fairly typical RPG writing. But by boss number 3, I was desperately fast traveling from key NPC who had asked me for one thing, then another. Why they wouldn't just give you a list of all the things that they need at once, I have no idea. It was pointlessly frustrating. So by the time you're actually fighting the boss, you're already a little annoyed at all the item throwing you've had to do, and I found each encounter to be way too easy and anticlimactic. Maybe I'm just a god gamer, but I really doubt it. It took me 146 attempts to beat Melania and Elden Ring, so you be the judge. But to me, the real cherry on the cake that really got on my nerves with this game was the narration, which absolutely killed it. Not in a, oh dude, you killed it man, well done, as in roadkill. which I feel a little bad saying because the narrator is actually a really talented voice actor and I love his voice, but the writers just did him dirty. The whole skeleton to the game is this epic, world-ending second apocalypse that every action you do is narrated in the goofiest and most childish way possible. Big spoilers here, but you may remember earlier I said the word Muma. Now in the tutorial, you're introduced to the tragic backstory of your character where his Muma, the creator of Wong Fu, is murdered by Lupa Lupin along with the rest of his village. But it is so hard to take the stakes seriously when the words like Muma and Clogged Fist are being thrown around. Honestly, Risk the Cat on Reddit said it best. This whole game feels like a dad who loves dad jokes reading you a children's book he wrote based on a fan fiction of Ratchet and Clank smoking crack and getting sucked into the Borderlands universe. Whilst it was kind of endearing at first, it's honestly just cringe, man.
The Majut once found and ate a bonbon gummy.
And to make matters worse, by default, every dialogue in the game is done by the rat saying which is then also narrated afterwards by the narrator in the 9-year-old fanfiction script of Ratchet and Clank.
He understands Wong Fu is hard. She figures the choosies from the old world are made from gummy trees.
Furthermore, around the map are a bunch of little tidbits of information about the previous state of the world thrown into turmoil and apocalypse by the greedy Toxinol company. Original, I know, and what's even more fun is all that info is narrated by the same guy in the same way. Fortunately, in the settings you can turn both the narrator or the off, but I found leaving just the narrator on was the lesser of the two evils with the tiny text on the Steam Deck, so bear that in mind when picking this up for the Switch. And lastly, in this section before I close things out, there is a weirdly ambiguous morality system in the game. There are a couple of big decisions in the game where you can choose light or dark option, which I'm so sorry to say is also narrated by a similarly cringe little sprite on your shoulder. Leaning into one choice or another affords you light and dark auras, which are prerequisites for certain abilities and affect your final ending to the game. And speaking of endgame, spoilers, but just in case things do go tits up, there is an arc mechanic to the game where you and a number of your chosen allies can be preserved had the worst happen to start anew. So massive spoiler here, timestamp on screen to skip past my ending to the game if you want, but I had a primarily light playthrough because I'm a bloody goody two-shoes, and in my playthrough I united the tribes without a big war, I forgave the main antagonist, and I defeated all of the world eaters. But for some reason, even though the world was saved, I still flew off in the arc, apparently to find new worlds that need saving, but I'm a bloody rat, mate. What am I supposed to do? I don't know. It just seemed like such a weird ending for the game. Fighting so hard to save a world only to leave it immediately without knowing if there even are worlds that need saving. With that in mind, I'd give the story and the world building a pretty sad 4 at best. Underwhelming and honestly pretty forgettable. To conclude all 3 sections, I'd round the game as a whole to a 5.5 to 6. The game is going for $34.99, seemingly on every single platform, which is honestly pretty rare to see, but given the fact it's not exactly cheap and it's somewhat lackluster, I don't know if I'd recommend it for everyone. The experience overall was not terrible by any means, but I find it so hard to give a solid recommendation, especially after recently picking up Cyberpunk, which was released at a similar sort of time and has actually been worked on really well by CD Projekt Red. Video on that coming sometime soon. But that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have played already or you do intend to pick the game up, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have I been too harsh here? Let me know what else you'd like to see on the channel. Drop a like and sub if you've enjoyed. Thank you in advance and much love.